Dan Pierce. I'm a senior consultant with Bentley's SUPERLOAD group. I want to thank everybody for attending. And we'll just get going here. So this is basically, we're going to talk about new methods for routing and some background. So main thing we're going to talk about is SUPERLOAD Connect Edition routing methods, enhancements that we've made, and some changes to the new background data. So feel free to ask questions as we're going. I can't see the questions right now, but Dan Vogan and Jim Scott will be paying attention to those and answering them. And at the end, we'll go through the questions. We'll answer them all at the end. But please do type them in as we're going. Anything you've got you want to ask about. So I'll just keep going here. So first, we're going to talk about our historical routing options. So if you're an ARPS user, these are the dialogues you would normally see. And ARPS is text-based routing. There's no map involved. And it's the user defines an origin and a destination, and then basically types in junctions. They can do offsets, borders, state borders, points of interest, cities, etc. to define their trip. So in ARPS, there's basically two modes. The first mode to the left here, evaluate mode, directly takes the trip that you define and does that trip and doesn't try to avoid any kind of bridge or restriction issues. The generate mode will take the origin and destination and find the best trip that doesn't cause any issues, that gets around any bridges, restrictions, etc. So that's typically that's what ARPS, that's how it basically works. So for SUPERLOAD, there are similar methods. So the text description method is similar to ARPS. Junction to junction mode basically is what ARPS does. And the auto origin destination is very similar to ARPS generate a trip, where auto origin destination, you give it the origin and destination, and it finds the best trip given the truck you have. Picking route segments in this preview version of SUPERLOAD lets the user actually click on links on route segments as they're going to define a really just precise trip. So that's the previous generation of SUPERLOAD, basically how it worked. You also could load save trips, and that's something that's moving forward as well. So the previous Connect edition of SUPERLOAD, we're looking at it here, had similar options. Enter a trip is similar to the ARPS version where you're typing junction to junction, key point, mile points, cities, and states. Generate a trip, that's the auto routing where you give it an origin and destination, and the system will find you the best route for your truck that avoids bridges, restrictions, everything at all possible. It'll give you that route. Pick a trip on a map is similar to the old version where it lets you click on individual links and define your trip that way. It's more tedious, but you get a lot of control of the trip. And then there's load a save trip, which is a similar deal where you set up this trip that you do very often. You can save that trip and then later use it for different applications, different trucks. So if it's a common trip you use a lot, those are handy. So what we try to do is we're constantly looking to provide the best-in-class capabilities. You know, we're using Google. I mean, we try to do things like Google, Bing Maps. They have made things where people get used to seeing a really good-looking map and having really good routing. So we kind of shoot for that as our target. We also take a lot of feedback from our users and try to enhance what we've got. And what we found is a lot of our users want different ways to do it. Sometimes they want it very simple, just origin and destination, and want the system to recommend a trip. But sometimes they want to select it on their own. And sometimes they want to define a specific variation, even though the system is trying to take in the best place. There might be something they know about the network or something that's changed really recently that would make them want to go a different way than that automatic place. So, like it says here at the bottom, some users want the system to take control, others want more control, and so we're trying to keep all of that. We're trying to make a better and better routing system, but still let somebody have a lot of control. If they want it done fully automatically, then it can happen that way. So what we've done is we've been moving toward generator trip because that's the easiest for most users, where they define an origin and destination, and they don't need to, the system has all the information it needs to know about restriction, construction, bridges, etc. So the system finds the best route. The user does have to give an origin and destination, of course. That's pretty important. But once they've got the origin and destination, then generator trip finds the best trip for them. And it uses all the configured rules, restrictions, etc., like I was mentioning. And it shows the user the best trip. It allows the user to modify the trip if they desire, and they can do it textually or they can pick on the map. So we feel like we've got a really good system. It's pretty easy for anybody that's used Google or something. It's pretty similar in that you type in addresses, you can type in your origin or your destination. You can click on the map too. So what we feel like is happening with this is that technically more people will be able to do the routing without needing the permitting office involved. And this new methodology forces focus on the routing preferences so that if you've got good restrictions defined, you've got good work zones, those kind of things defined, and they're in the system and they're up to date, then the system will automatically, work around those things and give you a good trip that doesn't cause any problems. So users with the default method are led through the process, but they have options to alter it during the way. They can take the fully automatic trip, but they have options to alter the trip as well. So we feel like all users can get through the routing process faster. People in the permitting office and the end users. But people that advanced users, maybe more permitting office users, if they got a really big truck, something really complicated, they can have a lot of control over what happens with that trip. So we didn't take anything away. We're just adding ease of use for most users. So what we're going to show you is some different options. Some of it's historic, the way it always is done, origin, destination. And this is the way the new routing starts. It's the default method we would prefer people to use, but the other options are there. And then what we've added, the new thing we've added is adding vias. So before we just had origin, destination for the auto routing. But now we've added the ability for you to put via points that the trip has got to pass through. So you can enter as many vias as you want, and you can control the trip. It's still automated in that it will still the trip will try to go around bridges that are issues and restrictions, etc. But it'll have to pass through each via as it's doing that. And the trips can be saved and reloaded. If you have a trip that's a common thing, you can save it, reload it, use it again, and you won't have to even do that part. So here we are doing generator trip. I'm going to start with a basic mode with just an origin and a destination. So this is going to show typing in. First I'm going to type in an origin. Let's say I'm going to start at the state border. So as you start typing, you see the type ahead starts showing you routes with that name. So I know I want to go I-70 at the Kansas border, so I start typing. As I start getting part of the word Kansas, there it is there, I click on it, add it. So I've defined my start point. There's my origin and my trip right there. So now I'm going to type in the destination. I know I want to go at I-35 and Iowa border. I click on that, add that. So now I've defined my trip, analyze the trip. So it's looking at bridge clearances, bridge ratings, and restrictions. And so you'll see that this analysis failed going on this trip. So I look at the bottom, there's restrictions. I can look at restrictions on the right, to the right over here. I can see the failed restriction was on I-70 at the beginning. So if I go back to my trip definition, I can see a restriction of that red area. That's a restriction from the border. They don't want anybody going from I-70 at all. So now I'm going to drag that point, I'm going to move it down to I-670, and the trip's going to be reanalyzed after I drop it down there. And now I've got a valid trip that passed. So now I'm going to clear that endpoint, and I'm going to put in an address. So I'm going to define my endpoint, my destination with an address. So it finds the nearest routable section of the network near that address and puts the point on that nearest spot of routable network. So there we got a trip from the border to that address. Now I'm going to do the trip by clicking at the border. Don't have to zoom all the way in to get the right points on an interstate. It knows which direction you're going, so it knows which side to take. So there I got a trip by clicking. I'm going to start over again at the border. And I'm going to do some clicking. Analyze that trip. So the reverse button, what that does is it reverses the trip, but what that's handy for is if you want a trip both ways, you can do a trip, do a permit, copy it, reverse the trip, and now you've got the exact opposite. It'll reanalyze that trip going the opposite direction. So on this, now I'm going to talk about display limitations and how to use some different tools we have together with defining your trip. So I'm going to first come in and do the same trip, clicking. Clicking on the other border, analyze the trip. And again, I've got a failure because of that restriction. So I'm going to show you a different way to, so let's say you're coming in from the border. We have a tool called display limitations. What that tool does is let you say, in a certain county or all counties, show me limitations for this vehicle I have. So I'm going to look at restrictions, analyze this county, and it shows me restrictions in that county. So if I'd have done this first, I could do this, especially when I'm coming from the border and I want to know where I can come in and I have issues. I can see that I shouldn't come in on 70. I don't have to try that. I know that 670 doesn't have any restrictions there. So if I start at 670 and go out at Iowa, that I have a good trip. So the display limitations is a valuable tool. It's one of those tools that are for more advanced users to some degree, but if you're coming in from the border, it's handy to know what kind of things are going to limit where you're trying to come in, so you don't have to keep poking around with the map over and over. All right, now we're going to talk about vias a little bit. So now we're in the same area. We're going to do a trip. Not the exact same trip. It gets a little boring. So we're going to start at the border again, but we're going to go up here to around Hoover area. And we're going to analyze that trip and see what the system gives us. What's the best way to get there? So there's the trip it gave us without any restrictions or any failures. That's a good trip. But let's say you, for some reason, you want to go up I-29. There's something you know that the system doesn't know. So with the vias, it allows you to add via points that the trip's got to pass through. Again, it's still trying to find the best trip between each set of vias. And I'm dragging here. You can reorder them. So I added them. I got to get them back in the right order. And then I can see my points. Green is the start, red is the end, right? I got 1 and 2 of your via points. So now I'm forcing this trip to go up that way. And both are valid trips, but I have my own reasons. I'm the permitting person or the end user, and I want to use I-29, and I want to try it, and it's valid. There's no failure, so there's no reason I shouldn't be able to use that. So this is the features that we've added mainly with routing recently, is with the generate trip, we let you enter via points, and you can add, there's no really limit to how many you would add. You can control the trip, have really good control of the trip the entire way, but because it's generated trip, it's still trying to avoid other issues as it's going. All right, now I'm going to demonstrate generator trip again, and this is going to show the system doing some ramp arounds. And a ramp around to our routing engine it's just another alternate route because we have ramps in this network. So if I analyze this trip, it did a couple of ramp arounds here. There's bridges there that have clearances that are, I have a 20-foot truck here. So there's two bridges that it ramped around to get around that. So now we have a toggle button, this analyze all possible trips toggle. What that does is it doesn't try to find alternate routes. It just takes the shortest route. And with that toggle button off, I can see these 2 bridges that the generated trip was avoiding. They're 16.3, and of course a 20-foot truck can't make that. So with the toggle button on, by default it is analyze the trip, and you can see the ramping. And the toggle button's kind of handy in a way that you can, if you're trying to, like I just did, you're trying to see what's going on, you can turn that toggle off and you can see what would have failed on the trip you had if you didn't have it on. So it's an analysis tool to have it off. By default it's on. And this way generally we want people to work, but you can turn it off and see what's going on. You can kind of tell better what the system's doing. So now I'm going to do, let's say you don't want the ramp arounds. So I've got the same trip I've got to take. So instead of going just origin destination, I'm putting in some via points down business 60 there, trying to get the system to not do those ramp routes, because let's say I don't want it to do that. Analyze the trip. And again, we've got a good trip, but we don't have the ramp rounds that we decided we didn't want those in there. So we took the ramp rounds out. By adding via points, we were able to take those out. So the via points really give you a lot of control. Like I said before, with generated trip, it was origin to destination, and you really couldn't control what it did. The system did a good job of doing that, but you couldn't tell it, I know better, I want a different way to go. So with vias, we're giving the user more control to go exactly where they want to go, basically. So now in this video, we're going to just kind of see how the system, how generator trip works, what it's doing under the hood. There's a lot going on. You know, this isn't just Google. Google doesn't have to worry about truck weights and their sizes and any of that. So I'm going to define a trip that I know is going to cause some problems. So I'm going to start here just south of Kansas City, going to the east a little bit. So there's where I need to go. If I analyze that trip, I've got a 15-foot truck here. So there are some bridges that would cause some issues. So we analyze that trip, and I can see it's a 38-mile trip. It had to kind of go out of the way because there must have been bridges in the way. It could be bridges or restrictions, ratings. If I turn off that toggle again, and now I'm doing more of an evaluate, like ARPS, analyze now, and it's going to take a more direct route, but we're going to see there's some bridges that would cause issues if we take the direct route. Shorter trip, but it wouldn't work. Turn the toggle back on. Now we got generate trip generating, looking for alternate routes to avoid those bridges. And there's the route it comes up with. So to kind of show you what's going on, we'll go to display limitations tool again here, and we can see all the bridges in Jackson County that this truck couldn't get under or through. And you can kind of see why the trip had to go where it did. If we saw the two bridges on the direct route, there's a lot of bridges that are less than 15-foot clearance. So that's why the trip went that way. So this is kind of a demonstration to show you what the generate trip, the evaluate trip does. Alright, so something that our software I think does really pretty well is that when you're clicking on a map, you've noticed I haven't had to zoom in a lot, and I'm doing a lot of interstate clicking here. So I'm just going to do a quick trip here, moving up the interstate somewhere I want to go. Not having to click a lot, but I kind of want it to go specifically up the routes that I'm going on. But again, I'm not having to zoom in to pick the right side of the interstate or something. It knows from my origin and destination which way I'm trying to travel. So I'm going to analyze this trip. We've got, what, 5 views in origin and destination. Pretty quickly can put them in. I don't have to zoom way in. And there's our trip. If we do zoom in and look a little bit, you can see the routes. Traveling on the right side of the road, going up the ramps, you can see exactly what ramp it's taking and everything. And it stays on the right side of the road because it knows the origin and destination. You can even see one of those points I clicked. I didn't zoom in, so I clicked on the wrong side, but the system, routing engine, can tell which direction you're going, so it keeps your route going the right way. So a lot of these things are refinements or things that we've gotten feedback from users. Some of the features we've added, like the views, that was something users wanted, and not having to zoom in so much. You know, you still can do that if you want a detailed view, but you can stay pretty zoomed out and define a trip pretty quickly. We think it's pretty user-friendly. So that's basically the demo of using the map.
Hey Dan, I'm sorry, just a real quick question, because I think it makes sense to ask it now, but there was a question on how does the system know which side of the interstate you're selecting, and I think you just touched on that a bit, right? It knows what your direction is or your origin and destination, but I don't know if
it does. Right, it knows from the origin and the destination, and the views are figured in, mainly the origin and destination. It knows direction of travel. You can figure that out. So you don't have to do that part. If you start the origin and go to the destination further up the interstate, it knows that if you're heading east, and we're going all kind of different directions here, right? I'm not just north and west, but
yeah, but
it knows how you started and how you ended.
But Dan, with any of those specific points, so too, especially like if we just talk about an origin point, the automated routing will actually look at trying to start both directions from that specific point. And see, you know, there may be a way to loop around to the south and then come back in and north, or there may be a way that's better to go straight north from a point or whatever. And so it intelligently is trying multiple paths in multiple directions when you get into using the vias or especially other methods with some of the selects and stuff, it's looking at direction of travel and knowing the side of the road. But we do a whole lot of pretty intelligent, multiple type of selection things to best determine that direction of travel. And should you be coming in specifically from one road to another right at a crossing and need to say, I'm starting this going this direction, then you can use some of the entries and offsets in the panel there in a command. But otherwise, if you're just saying, hey, I'm on State Route 1 and I'm coming in off of this driveway right here, you may be able to go left or right off that driveway, and we automatically try to figure out which way is optimal.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I didn't mean to oversimplify it. There's a lot going on where it tries to figure it out. And it doesn't take control from you. You can still do it the way you want. You can still make the trip go the way you want. But it does analysis of the points as you're entering it. It looks at both sides and tries to figure out the best way. And it worked real good. People are using this right now and not having any complaints about how that works. So I'll go to start talking about the background. So this is the other thing that's the bigger thing that's changed recently with us. We want to have the best in class capabilities with our backgrounds. We want to have really good backgrounds and good maps and imageries. In our before version, we had our own map and our own graphics, but there wasn't fancy backgrounds like a Google or Bing or Mapbox provides. So with our connective vision, we started using Mapbox. And Mapbox is great. It's got live streaming tiles. It's very up to date. So people are always getting the latest map, good-looking graphics. So licensing these things is impacted by how much people use it. And we have a partnership with Microsoft. So we're switching from Mapbox to Bing. So maps, the background benefits. Everybody sees, top of the line what they're used to seeing in Google or something, where tiles are updated. You can see rivers and streams and all that kind of stuff. And we supply some additional backgrounds to help with user preferences. Like this picture here is a high contrast for somebody maybe with color blindness or other issues. So there's outdoors, there's different base maps you can use. Satellite, of course, is really handy when you're trying to look at a specific area, bridges or something. So we'll continue to do this with no additional fees. We supply the background. So here's just a quick comparison of, here's Mapbox on the left, Bing on the right. You can see they look pretty similar. There's slight color variations, that kind of stuff. But as far as our end users' experience, it's going to look the same. It's going to function the same as Mapbox did. Here's satellite imagery, similar deal. It's satellite. It looks pretty much the same, slightly different colors. But other than that, it really is pretty much the same. So that's it